We have a very busy weekend in Canadian soccer coming on up, gentlemen. We will finally get the answer as to who the next president of Canada Soccer will be, at least for one more year. The AGM meetings are happening this weekend. They will vote. It's one of two candidates of Charmaine Crooks and Rob Newman. Why is it only 1 year? Well, because that's the term remaining on the Nick Bontis presidency that he vacated earlier this year. So who are these candidates? Well, Charmaine Crooks is right now the interim president of Canada Soccer. This is a 5-time Olympian in athletics, an Olympic silver medalist. She's been on many boards, including the Canadian Olympic Committee and the International Olympic Committee, the World Olympians Association, and she also supports a lot of charities, Right to Play being one of them. In 2022, was given the Order of Canada, and she joined the Canada Soccer Board of Directors in 2013. In 2021, was named vice president, and then once Nick Bontis resigned, was named interim president in March of 2023. So now who is Rob Newman? Well, this is somebody who has served on the board of directors for Canada Soccer in the past from 2002 to 2012. And in fact, from 2008 to 2012, he was the vice president of Canada Soccer. He's also the president, or was the president of Saskatchewan Soccer, and is currently the president and CEO at Sport BC, is the chair of the National Sport Trust Fund, and vice chair of Kids Sport Canada. So both with experience in Canada Soccer, both sitting on multiple boards, and both like to give back to grassroots level as well with soccer in this country. So Ollie, when we take a look at these two candidates, what are your first impressions, and what do we know about the platforms that each of them are running on?
Probably not a great deal, to be honest with you. There hasn't been a whole lot of public engagement, I don't think, over the past few weeks leading up to this election. We did ask both candidates if they would like to come on the show today in order to kind of go through their platforms. We were told through a spokesperson that Charmaine Crooks isn't doing any media in the lead up to the election, and Rob Newman, we didn't get a response from. So we did try to give them that opportunity, but unfortunately that didn't come through. So we're kind of left to piece things together a little bit from the media reports that are out there, from the information we can get behind the scenes a little bit. I think it's clear that this is kind of being positioned as Rob Newman coming in as a potential change candidate. It seems like he is the one who is being backed by the players. I will personally say, to be quite frank, I find his kind of case and platform to be the change candidate a little bit of a stretch. As you said, Andy, this is someone who served on the board of directors for 10 years from 2002 to 2012. I understand that maybe finding someone who fits the description of a change candidate is difficult because you have to have served on the board of directors to be eligible to be elected to this position. But again, I'm not sure I can completely sign up to the idea that this is someone completely new. There's also been some reporting that Rob Newman has strong views around the CSB deal. Now, there was a phrase used in an article by CSN that he had advocated on a call with voters to rip up the deal. Wheels, I think, has got some information that maybe disputes whether that was the language used or not. But I also find that to be a position, to be honest with you, that isn't really viable for a candidate to take at this point, either legally or in terms of what is best for the future of soccer going forward over the next few years here. So there are a couple of things there that I think that kind of raise my eyebrows a little bit when it comes to potentially a changing of the guard here. I suspect it'll probably be the same for some of the voters. And so that's why I'm expecting Charmaine Crooks to win. I think it would be an upset if she doesn't. But we'll find out. And I think on Charmaine's part, just to add quickly on her, I think from what I can gather, the emphasis is clearly to try to build bridges with the players, to try to mend that relationship. I think that's the right thing to do at this point, obviously, for anyone who's elected to that position. And I think it's also fair to say that she has overseen quite a bit of change. A lot of people have left this organization, both over the last few weeks and even preceding, obviously, her time as president when Nick Bontis departed as well. So to say there hasn't been any change is not quite accurate, but clearly, I think on the players' side, there's still a desire for more.
Mm-hmm. So, Wills, what do we know then about some of these platforms then, and maybe some of the fill in the gaps here of what Ollie's discussing?
Well put. First off, this is going to be the most covered AGM in maybe Canadian soccer history, because it kind of, the AGM was last weekend, and then we just kind of all moved on with their lives. And let's hope that whoever wins the presidency, whoever's named to the new board of directors, that they're afforded some understanding, a little bit of an easier ride than the previous people in those roles have been in. It's been tumultuous to say the least over the last couple of years. So hopefully there's some progressive agendas and there's more calm in the future, although I'm not quite too sure, quite too confident about that. I think Ollie kind of outlined things very well. There was a letter that was sent out by the men's and women's national team players on Wednesday, outlining their desire to see change within the Canadian Soccer Association. I'm not sure what exactly that means, because Rob Newman is hardly an agent of change, in my opinion. He is part of the old boys club that's been much maligned publicly by the players and in the Heritage Committee seemingly every time that they convene. I mean, it's very difficult to follow what the agenda of the Heritage Committee is because everything gets conflated. Is it pay equity? Is it the running of the CSA? Is it safe sport? Is it Bob Berarda and abuse? And this was a person that was the lead of governance at the Canadian Soccer Association during the Bob Berarda years, which is a little bit puzzling to me, especially when you dig a little bit deeper. And I can confirm, I've converted with multiple sources, that Rob Newman's name was actually put forward by Diana Matheson. She was the person that nominated Rob Newman to run for president this time around. So I know, speaking to some people that are voters and who are onlookers within Canadian soccer, they're a little bit confused based upon where the dialogue has been within the Heritage Committee and in Canadian soccer circles, especially from players and former players, and how all of this adds up. To that point, Oliver mentioned that in a TSN article, it outlined that that Newman came out and said to voters in his presentation last Thursday that he would rip up or renegotiate the CSB deal. I'm told that isn't the case. I'm told that wasn't said. There were certainly questions pertaining to it, but that language was not used by the candidates. So that is factually not true. And something else that interesting that came out of this presentation is that Newman stated that he only planned on staying in the post for 1 year, just finishing the Bontis term. And it doesn't seem like he, at least in the eyes of the voters and by what he had to say, he wasn't interested in staying beyond a year, which kind of would leave him in a lame duck territory as someone that's running for president. Like, what are you going to accomplish over the course of a calendar year, especially when the idea is that you won't run after that? So what's the mandate here? What's the idea behind him challenging Charmaine Crooks for the presidency of the Canadian Soccer Association right now? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. There's only so much can happen in a year. And finally, just pertaining to the whole idea of change, this is something that the players want. I think that we all acknowledge that change needs to be had, but for me, it more so lies in maybe the bylaws and the way that the Canadian Soccer Association runs and votes and that sort of thing, rather than the individuals themselves. Like, individuals come and go, but it's kind of the statutes and the laws that, in the way that the organization is governed, these are the things that need to change. So, like, look, wanting to get rid of people based upon vendetta, emotional things, I'm not sure if that makes sense. Like, if you want to create long-lasting, sustainable change, you do that by other means. It requires an evolution, not a revolution. Change has happened. Over 100 years of experience have been taken out of people that actually work for the Canadian Soccer Association. I'm not talking about board members that are leaving or presidents. There's been 2 general secretaries over the last 2 years. Montopoli and Cochrane have both left. I mean, Cochrane's still there until after this AGM is done, and then he'll be leaving next month. The CMO in Gage, she's gone. The COO in Guest, he is gone. The head of communications in Scott, he is gone. Like, who's left? It's the CFO in Heffernan. He's like an accountant. I'm not sure why that really matters that much. They've just hired a new COO in Chamberlain from the province of Quebec in February. He's been on the job for 2 months. And they've just hired an interim general secretary in Jason DeVos last week. Other than that, you have the head coaches, Priestman and Herdman, who are the technical leads. Like, in that letter, the players called for change of personnel that are working for the CSA. Who is their like? I'm a little bit puzzled by this whole idea of change. And And by the way, in the player's letter, and my rant was coming to an end here, it didn't mention that they're backing Newman specific as that candidate either. So it's a little bit of a head scratcher. Some of these things that are being asked upon, and some of the maneuvering and the jockeying that's being had. It's very much a political race, and I'm not sure that we're getting all the details of some of the motivations and desires and why things are happening.
Yeah, before we get back to the letter, there you go. And that was a world record. Before we get back to the letter, and I'll get Jordan and Ollie's, thoughts on that. I do want to get Jordan. I do want to come to you and kind of get your impressions as well, of these, two candidates, as somebody who's been a part of soccer in this country too. Obviously this is something I can imagine that you're keeping an eye on, and I'm just wondering your thoughts on it.
I'll talk briefly about Wheels. I thought a lot of what you said was great, but what stuck out to me was the evolution revolution bit, because I was looking for a catchphrase. I should have leaned on you a long time ago, because you're the one that usually come up with those. But it's true. And like I was thinking, oh, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and whatnot. But it's very conflicting, because the rhetoric, the people I've spoken to, players I've played, it's about, change. And then Rob Newman, I'm not saying that they're backing him, but people are maybe pushing them in that direction to be the one to take over. And it is kind of like old boys. And then you have Charmaine Crooks, who I wonder if there's something hidden that she's done or that people have felt, because they're like, hey, out, let's get rid of and clean house. But for me, with her, not because she's a 5-time Olympian and not because she shares the same heritage as my mother and comes from Jamaica. It's not any of these things, but she just seems like someone that could put the CSA in a better place in a year. I'm not saying fix everything. I'm saying that put it basically, who is the candidate that could take the situation from what it is now into a better place 365 days? And for me, it seems like her. I know Andy, you always tell me as a journalist, we're supposed to be neutral and not supposed to pick a side and whatnot. I'm trying my best. But when I look at the things that I know, and I don't know that much about all the ins and outs as Wheels and and Ollie knows, when I look at what I can see, I can't see how with Charmaine Crooks it would be in a worse position, and that she wouldn't be someone that could maybe, especially the things that she's focusing on, which I've always said was transparency, and the players have been talking about that. She seems like a person that could have those conversations and put things to rest. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was my impression of the two.
Yeah, I've reached out to, quite a few players. And from what I also just understand about Charmaine Crooks is there's a little bit of hurt there in the feeling that she was complicit in some of the things that were said during meetings, said to players by other people, be it Nick Bontis, in particular. And we also heard what was said there with Christine St. Clair, and that she did not come to the defense of players or did not say anything. Again, did she feel comfortable to do that? Did she do that behind closed doors that people are not aware of? But at least in front of players, they felt that there was little to no action taken by her to stand up or speak up to other authorities at Canada Soccer. I've also reached out to players to just ask about Rob Newman, and I've received a no comment when it comes to, trying to understand his nomination and what it is they feel he can bring, because you bring up some valid points. He was part of an old guard as well, which is something we're hearing that, they do want to dismantle. And in particular, he was part of a time at Canada Soccer where, we discussed the Bob Berarda situation. So there's wasn't a lot of clarification there either when it comes to him. But this is where I start to wonder, Ollie, when we get to the players' letter. So they sent a letter to the Provincial Soccer Federation presidents calling for fundamental change. And I wonder if this is also the players' way of saying the bylaws right now, to your point, means somebody had to have served for a year before they can be So technically anyone right now is part of the old guard in that way. I wonder if this is the players' way of also saying bylaws need to change.
I think that would be wise. I'll be honest, I found the letter to be a little vague, to be honest. It was kind of more generalizations more than anything. But I think certainly maybe we will see in the aftermath of this election that is the route the players go down in terms of the bylaws, in terms of needing to serve on the board to be president, in terms of the share of the vote that the players receive in elections like this. It's very small. I think that would probably be wise on their part if they want to have more influence in these decisions, to start going down those avenues. I think now, like I said, I'll level with people. These are my personal views, but I don't find the apparent change candidate, which has been made out to be Rob Newman in this election. I don't find the candidacy compelling for some of the reasons that have already been outlined. The history of having served on the board for a long time in years that were not glittering years for this association by any means. Only serving for 1 year doesn't really kind of make sense to me, to be honest with you, if you're really going to be a change candidate. Views on some of the the key aspects of what's going to happen going forward here, including the CSB, don't seem to be entirely clear. I don't know. I wasn't on that call, so maybe there's more clarity that the voters have received, but I just don't find the alternative option to continuing with Charmaine Crooks to be particularly convincing right now. And like I said, I'd be surprised if the voters kind of don't lean the same way.
And Jordo, how did you feel about that letter?
I felt that, again, I think we all understand that this needs to be changed, but I think we're dancing around that word change a little bit too much. I think we need to get into specifics. And I think also with change is also, there's bylaws and whatnot, but it is patience that is attached to it. You can think about any situation and you're like, hey, this needs to be different, but you don't expect the next day you snap your fingers, turn around, and things are better. It's about progression and trying to move forward into a direction. I know that me being a former player and the players that play on the national team, you want change. You want things to happen quickly. And I know that the emotional side of it, that there are years where things haven't been how they should and you haven't seen progress, that you're expecting, okay, well, that is the time that is added to this new change. But I think you have to look at it from now and and push on. And then again, what I said earlier is, who is the person that can leave the CSA in a better place now, a year from now? So that letter, I think what I would encourage players to do is be specific about the change that they want to see, and then allow some time to actually have that develop. Because it's like change, we all get it. I think anyone, even people that haven't been privy to Canada soccer, they understand, like, okay, things aren't working and players aren't happy, but the specific change that they want to see, and be realistic and patient about those changes. I think that's something that I would encourage players to address.
Well, and I think patience, right? Patience is a virtue, because I do think there is a little bit of an urgency here for the players, because what they are looking at, of course, is 2026 and the Men's World Cup, which, as we know, will also be on home soil here. So there's wanting the right people in place to be able to maximize this. Maximize it financially, maximize it from a marketing point of view, maximize it for a federation to be able to grow, maximize it, to support, I would hope, like a men and a women's league, right? So there's definitely some urgency there. And the other urgency, of course, is to sign a deal. So this is what maybe we're expecting after this election is done. When I had a chance to speak to Jason DeVos, who's interim general secretary, I had said, like, after this weekend and it's all said and done, when you finally have a president in place, do you turn your attention back to the labor negotiations? But just so everyone knows, this is the breakdown of votes as well when it comes to this weekend. So there are a total of 85 votes. 21 of those come from the Pro League. So, of course, that's the 3 Canadian teams in Major League Soccer. And right now, the only domestic league in Canada, which is the Canadian Premier League. So they get 15 votes. The MLS teams get 6. And then you can see the breakdown. Of course, Ontario, Quebec, those are pretty big provinces, hence why they get 10 each. Then you can see the players, the men, the women. So they get 1 each for a total of 2, the referees and the coaches. So this is where maybe they want a little bit of finessing, players getting more votes, right?
Andy, if I'm going to look into my crystal ball, this is where I think the next fight is going to be waged. It's going to be the players trying to get more votes. Remember, the big Ontario, Quebec used to have way more votes. They've had to relinquish some as pro clubs have come in, and they've been able to spread them out a little bit more. But I mean, like, that's where the bulk of the Canadian players, youth players, come from. And something to remember in all these negotiations, like, it's not just about the national teams. It's about running the Canadian Soccer Association from coast to coast to coast, from the amateur game to referees, to providing pathways. Like this touches on everything. So although the conversation is being skewed heavily in the players, in the national team players' favor, they're where the conversation goes. There's a lot of interest within the provinces in trying to wrestle away those votes from the provinces. That can get really ugly. Like there's a lot of different battles to be had in order to provide the system that various parties believe is going to be equitable. So it's not just how a president's named, it's how the voting goes and how the CSA is governed. And these things are going to take time. They're simply going to take time. So that's something to keep an eye. That's where I think the conversation might go moving forward. Let's hope it's done so in a harmonious way. But, again, I'm not sure. I can't tell the future, but this will be an issue going forward.
Yeah. So governance, bylaw, and then the contracts here, right, Ollie, and the men and women. It still looks like they need to get on the same page when it comes to equal pay. Do you expect much will actually get done? I know there will be conversations, and hopefully there will be positive movement. But do you think we start to just see signatures on the dotted line in this year?
I hope so. It's not going to be imminent, and it could take longer. There's no question. What we need to happen from all sides, I'm talking men's national team, women's national team, CSA, CSB is involved obviously as well. There's going to need to be some climb down and compromise. Like people are going to have to meet in the middle and kind of, I think, particularly lower the temperature of some of these conversations that are happening through the media right now. Right now, it does not feel like we're in a place where the players are prepared to sign a deal to kind of make peace with the association. I still have doubts, like you mentioned there, Andy, about their position in relation to each other as well and equal pay. So I think it's going to take some time yet, but it's going to take, it's probably some pride being put aside. And like I said, some compromises here to ultimately get this thing done, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Well, there's no indication that they're anywhere close. I'm not sure why this hasn't been talked about more in the media. We're like basically 11 months since this offer was tabled by the Canadian Soccer Association to the players. A reminder that will see the women's national team be the second most well compensated side in the world after the United States. For the men, it will safely and firmly put them within the top 10% of nations worldwide in terms of what the players will bring in. It is on the table that even if the women don't get out of their group, they lose every game at the Women's World Cup, each player involved will bring home roughly $140,000 for the World Cup efforts. Like, these aren't insignificant chunks of change here. That offer's on the table. And when we get these statements about, about the players wanting change, I think that the public is long overdue for a statement about where things stand when it comes to the collective bargaining agreement. One other thing that I want to bring up, and it's not just the presidential election that's going on this weekend. New board members will be elected as well. So there will be new board members, new people joining that board. What we've heard over the last year is a lot of emotions, especially from former players. And we said it on this program, if you want to be that agent of change, step up and be that. Unfortunately, we do not see players, former players, amongst the group of individuals who are now part of the nomination process to join the board of directors. Why haven't more players step up and put their name in the hat? If you want to see change, if you want to have influence on the way that the Canadian Soccer Association is governed, take a step forward. It requires work. It requires intellectual brain power. It requires forward-thinking people. And I hope that, and I would have hoped that more former players would have taken that challenge on. Unfortunately, that's not where we're at. So it's one thing standing on the sidelines and complaining about the state of things and the status quo. It's another thing throwing into your name in the hat and trying to be a vehicle for positive change. And unfortunately, that's not happening this time around. Hopefully in the next year, like, the board is turning over. Like 75% of the board will have turned over within the next 2 years. And that's incredible change. So there's still opportunity there. And I hope that at least another former player will throw their name into the hat and try to make a real difference here.